All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome back, everyone. I'm Nicole. If you weren't here last time, is there anyone that wasn't here last time that's joining us for the first time? Okay, all repeat customers. Great. Well, I just wanted to start off and check in with y'all. So how did it go this past week? Did any of y'all do some weaving? Do y'all want to share what you worked on over the past week? Or no pressure to, but if you'd like, I'd love to see what y'all worked on. Rebecca? Oh, beautiful. All right. Thanks for sharing that, Rebecca. And Colleen. Oh, lovely. Beautiful Rose. All right. Does anyone else want to hold theirs up and share? You're also welcome to come on mic and talk if it calls to you. Laura, beautiful. Look at those tidy rows. Very nice. All right.
I
Cool.
don't think I started a new row right, but you can't tell, so.
That's okay. Yeah, it's like sometimes I'll get so far into a weaving and then realize like, oh shoot, like I messed up the pattern. And I feel like most of the time I leave it if it's real far down or,
Yeah.
it adds to it. Oh, and someone else is holding one up. Oh, beautiful. Look at all those colors. Very nice. Yeah, did anyone run into any trouble? Oh, Sheila, beautiful. Wow, I love all that purple. Very nice. Um, yeah, does anyone have any hiccups or snags along the way or any lingering questions between our last class and now? Okay, great. Well, oh, Jennifer. Oh, beautiful. You use some of the funky stuff. Looks like there's a little tassel, little dangle happening. That's cool. I love that. Wow, these all look so different. So cool. Well, thanks to everyone who shared. It was really fun seeing them all. Um, so it looks like some of you perhaps have woven sort of far up the loom, and where others are a little haven't woven quite as much. So both are fine. But what I wanted to do today is so my plan next class is to for our final class is to show you how to take the tapestry off the loom and how to do all of the finishing touches that you need to do to make sure it's secure and ready to hang on the wall or do whatever you want to do with it. But today I wanted to show you, we went over the very basic technique of just the plain weave, the under over. And so I wanted to show you a few little like extra tricks and tips for just adding some more texture, just creating a more dynamic tapestry by making shapes, maybe adding fringe, things like that. So I'm going to demonstrate a few different techniques that you can, again, like last time, I'll demonstrate them all, give you an opportunity just to watch, and then I'll demonstrate it again, and you can do it along with me if you want. And this can be something like maybe you're not making a shape in this moment that you want to have in your final tapestry, but it could just be a good time to practice and make sure you get the technique. And then between this class and next class, you can, implement that technique into your final tapestry. So don't feel pressure that like whatever you weave tonight has to be your final piece by any means. You can always take it out and sort of strategize your what's the word? Strategize your design a little bit more. So, so for those of you that are a little farther along, like some people had woven so much that maybe it looks like they're to the point where they would take their tapestry off of the loom. So if you want, because again, I'm not going to show tonight how to take it off the loom, but if you want to just practice some of these techniques, what I'll recommend is you can flip your loom over and just sort of practice on your backside of the loom, not to confuse anybody. But let me spotlight. So yeah, so for instance, on my loom here, so this is the front that I did a few rows on last week. And if you are woven, all the way, because once you start getting more and more, farther up the loom, it's going to be, you get to a point where it's pretty difficult to add any extra rows. So if you're sort of to that point, or you feel like you have a finished tapestry, then yeah, you can just sort of practice on these back rows and yeah, just to learn the skills. And once we take it off next week, you'll have learned how to do it start to finish. So you can always, and you should, probably have some yarn left over from the kit, so you can just keep on making new tapestries and experimenting. So that is the plan for tonight. And okay, so just as a little refresh here, and just to get myself sort of in the groove, I'm going to add a new color. I'm going to add this green in. It's calling to me tonight. And so again, I like to cut off like 3 arms length of yarn, and that's just arbitrary to an extent. Basically, I don't want it so short that I'm going to run out of it really soon. And I don't want it so long that, it gets tangled on me all the time and just takes forever to go back and forth on my rows. So I find that about 3 arms length is sort of a good number to go by. So I'm going to look back and see where I left off on my blue. So I have my little tail sticking out there. And I see that this is the warp thread that I last passed over. And I was going this way. I was going right to left. So I'm going to go under the one behind that. So I'm going to catch the one behind the last warp thread I went over, so that I backtrack just a little bit so that my new color I'm adding on is nice and secure. And again, at any time, feel free to turn your mic on and interrupt me with questions, or if you can't really see what I'm doing very well, definitely let me know. So please interrupt me anytime you need to. So here's my little tail. I'm gonna pass it under the warp threads that came before it to kind of get it out of my way and secure it down to the back. So I lifted those warp threads up with my needle and passed it to the back. And I'm gonna grab my comb and push down. So I'll do just a couple more rows just to get sort of situated here. And so the first thing I want to show you is just how to continue doing this plain weave, but with some slight alterations. So I have a few rows of my green here. And now let's say I want to just switch things up a little bit. So I want to keep this green, but I want to add a second color in along with it as my weft. So so you can add more than one piece of yarn into your needle. So I'm going to get, I'm going to get this gray that I'd used a little bit of before. And some of you may have experimented with this. I think perhaps I talked about it last time and mentioned that it's something you could do. But I'm going to weave this end back in a little bit with my green. So let's see. I'm just going to, here's one that I went over. So to follow the green, I'm going to go under this one below and sort of bring my tail in and stick it behind. So again, starting my new color there. And then, so finishing out this row. And sometimes too, I don't know if anyone tried it, but you can also use just your fingers to manipulate and go under over. Some people end up liking that a little better than working with the needle. So if that's something you've found in the last week, great. So now I have my gray linked up with my green here, and I'm going to trim these. They're the same length, and then put them both through my needle. And see what happens. So I guess the trick on this one is feeding it through the needle with these thicker threads and having more than one. So what I like to do is I like to twist them up. Sometimes like pinching and twisting them up can help condense the yarn so it's easier to put through the needle. So then just trying a few rows, then with the double color, we start to get this neat kind of marbling effect. And because we're using more thread on each row, we start to see a little variation in the texture. It's not super dramatic because the weft thread isn't so thick that it's standing out that much, but it does start to give a little variation to texture. And so with weaving, with tapestry weaving in particular, not only is it fun to play with color and shapes and patterns, but playing around with texture. And so you can start to see there, again, it's not super dramatic, the change in texture. Let me show you an example here. Like here's an example of a tapestry I made where the peach here is much finer. I just used one strand of thinner yarn, and then I use, this is actually a strip of fabric, and see how it gets that sort of play in texture by using different widths. So doubling up your yarn, something you can try. You get these sort of marbled effects. And then I'll finish up with that here. And whoops, see there, I pulled too tight, so I'm just gonna back it up and comb down. And then I'm gonna be done with this. So I'm gonna weave it back in a little ways. And so I weave it partway in, and then I take my needle underneath all of the rest and pull it out. And then I just have my ends there that I'll deal with in a little bit. And so you've also got this roving in your kit. There should be a couple pieces of roving, and roving is unspun fiber. So roving is spun to get to the yarn. So I think this is wool. I'm not totally sure. It might be synthetic, but it seems wool-like to me. So you can use this just in this big, really big, thick piece. And so with something like this, where it's a short piece, I've talked about how you don't want to have your ends necessarily sticking out. All of these that are sticking out now will sort of tuck in at the end. With something like this, you could just have sticking out at the ends and have that be a design element. So with this, I might just sort of, I would use my fingers with this because it doesn't really fit through the needle, or at least I don't wish to attempt that. So I'm just going to pass it through. And so it's a little, I don't know. I mean, you could make it work with this piece and have it be really thick and chunky and fun. I mean, that is kind of fun, actually. I might kind of leave it like that. And you can, with roving, you can sort of manipulate it and like pucker some up in between and like poof it a little bit more. And then come back in with another row. I like the green and the navy next to each other. And then the ends would sort of be a little design element. So with this, again, I'll pick up one of the threads. Actually, I'll go the same direction as the roving to start off this. So my first full row is the opposites over under than the roving. So my first little one will kind of follow the same pattern the roving is. And then as I come in for my first full row, I'll pick up all the threads that the roving is passing under. And then by building these rows on top, then that helps secure the roving in place. So that's something to play around with.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you're using two yarns together, like you're using the gray and the green, can you just start with them off together, or do you have to start the green and then you're adding the gray if you're going to do two colors at once?
Yeah, great question. Great question. You can, you can definitely start them off together. I just demonstrated it that way because I had the green already going. But yes, great question. And so, so with the, whoops. So, and you'll see I accidentally didn't switch my rows when I went back, or switch the over under. So then the row will just come out. If you just saw that happen to me, that may have happened to you already. And that's your, that's how you know that you didn't switch. You know, you went under again when you should have gone over. But so with roving, it kind of puffs up the warp threads, and so it might take a few rows before you get them evened out again. And you know, one thing you can do too, instead of using just the full piece, I think I know in my kit I got 2 different pieces. So one thing you can do is you can always split this apart as well. So you don't have to use the full piece. You can split it apart and thin it out if you don't want to use that full chunk. And you could even, and that would maybe help you do additional rows instead of just 1 row. So that's something you can do there. And then along with the roving, you got some of the fun and funky yarns. And so with those, you know, you can just you would weave those in just the same way as you would your regular yarn. And then you can, like the roving, there's ways you can sort of manipulate it once it's woven in. But let me finish this green here. My warp threads are still a little wonky from that roving. In retrospect, one thing I might do to even them out quicker is to double up on my yarn. And even if I just wanted to use the green, I might do like 3 pieces or 2 pieces of green, just because that thicker yarn will help even out. I don't know if you can see what I mean, but like they're, yeah, I don't know how to show this very well. Basically, like the warp threads that the roving passed under are raised up quite a bit more than the others. So to even that out quicker, I might have, in retrospect, done some doubled up on my green to help even that out. But so here's one of my fun yarns. And this one I am going to double up. So this is like a really fun kind of crushed velvet yarn. It feels really nice. So I'm going to double up. So I'm just going to, for this one, since it's 1 piece that I want to use 2 strands of at a time, I'm just going to pass it through evenly through my needle so that the ends are even at the end. And I'll start where I left off with the green here. And some of you may have gotten some little fringes. And so the little fringy thread, you can just, you know, manipulate that after you've woven it in and like pull some of the strands of fringe forward so that it kind of looks a little more fringy, so that like all the fringe doesn't necessarily go to the back side. Let's see what this funky texture looks like. And so for me, this is what I have a lot of, well, I have a lot of fun with a lot of parts of weaving. Oh, so I did it again. I'm talking and not paying attention enough. But I really love building up these different textures. To me, that's like very satisfying and really fun to see. But of course, I love playing with color too. And so on that roving, you'll see how the warp thread shows through. So using thicker threads, thicker kinds of fiber will make your warp thread show through, and also that will then add some variation to the color palette and give some neat effects. So that's something to think about. So because my warp thread is a cranberry red and this velvet is sort of a cranberry red, it's not as noticeable, but I still like that you see the warp thread and there's this sort of variation in texture. So Okay, so let me finish up with this and then let's move on. I want to show you how to make some shapes. So enough with the plain weave, but I just want to show you how I work with some different kinds of fiber. And you'll notice if you use the thicker fiber, it builds up your weaving much quicker. So if you want to do like a quicker project, thicker fibers will get you there faster. But if you want to do more fine tapestry work, then you'll use thinner fibers for that. So cool. I love that velvet. That was very fun. So let's see. I'm going to show you how to make a shape here. Let me see. What color do I want to use? Yeah, I kind of like this lilac color. And again, I'll pause a moment if anyone has questions that they want to jump in and ask, comments. Okay, so I think for the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to double up on this lilac fiber so that my shape builds up a little more quickly so that you can all see it well. This time I cut 2 pieces of the lilac. And let's see, let me work in here where I left off. So what I think I'm going to do is I want to have like I'm going to build a lilac triangle sort of sloping this way. That's my plan. So the skinny point will be over here on the right, and then the wider bits will be over on the left. So that's my plan. So I'm just starting out my row to where I'm finishing off. Ooh, knocked my camera there. Finishing off where I left off before. Okay. And so basically, as I'm working on this triangle, instead of doing full rows, instead of going all the way to my edge warp threads, I'm gonna instead start wrapping around warp threads in the middle to create a triangle shape. So basically I'm gonna be working in this slant. So every time I go from left to right, I'm gonna bring in, I'm gonna subtract a warp thread so that I start to create a triangle shape. So, and then depending on how quickly you taper in will determine, will affect the slope and the shape of your triangle. So you can sort of taper in every time, every other time, depending on what you want your slope to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and turn back around on this warp thread to get my start, so I can see well the base of my triangle and sort of where the point is going to be. Okay, and then now this time as I go back, I'm going to go one less. So this was my last warp thread on the last strand, and now this is going to be my last warp thread. So I pass over it as I'm coming through. So the one that's going to be my last warp thread, I just passed over it. So that means I've got to be sure and pick it up as I go back. So again, this was the last warp thread last strand. So now I need to pick up this one as my next one. I'm just going to do one step at a time. So narrowing in one warp thread every time. And if I was using thinner thread, I might go around each warp thread 2 or 3 times to help build my triangle. Because if you're using real thin thread, it might be difficult to see that shift in the slope. So it's a fun thing to experiment with. Building these shapes. And then I'm going to keep going for a little bit here. I might not make it a full pointy triangle on this end. But so, and with when you're using thicker thread, the shapes sometimes are, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but not another word is coming to mind, but the shapes sometimes are a little cruder, like the edges are not as straight. They're sort of choppier, I guess, which is not a bad thing. Like it's just a different aesthetic. So if you wanted like very fine and very smooth lines on your shapes, you would want to use thinner fabric for that kind of thing, or thinner yarn, that is. Okay, so I'm satisfied with where that is. So I'm gonna finish up with this and then get that out of my way. Cool, so you can see there how I have this slope now. And so when you're doing shapes, you always want to, work your way up. So you always want to fill in and try and get to a somewhat level row. And I guess that's to say, like, I wouldn't want to start weaving over here on top of my triangle and over without filling this space in. And again, there could be a time when you would like to have that space, and it could be like this cool aesthetic element, like having just these exposed work threads. And that's something you could do. You'd need to do like a little work to secure the weaving around the exposed threads, which isn't something I'm going to go into, but that is something you could do for sure. But when you're wanting to do sort of basic shape making, you want to fill in around whatever the first shape is you made. So let's see, what color do I want to use here? I'm going to go back to this turquoise I had earlier. And so I do this sometimes when I'm like deciding on colors, like I'll hold the color up sort of in the space I'm trying to fill, and gives me an idea of what it might look like and whether or not I want that. If I want a darker color. Yeah, I think I want a darker color. I'm gonna use this black, right? Yeah, I don't want that blue. I'm gonna use this black. So again, I'm gonna double up to sort of match what I have going on the other side. I don't have to do that. I could just do one piece and sort of build up in a little different way with just one piece of yarn. But just for simplicity of demonstration's sake, I'm gonna double up here. So I've got my yarn, and so I'm gonna start in my first row where the lilac leaves off and go to the right this way. Because for me, I don't know, that it feels better about coming up and filling in. And it will be better, in my opinion, for like having the end in the middle. So I'm going to start in, and I'm going to try and match the direction the lilac was going. So it went over this. So I need to go under this next one and fill in like this. And so there are, as I mentioned last class, with weaving and, with all kinds of art and craft practices, there's more than one way to do something. So with shape making, it's the same thing. There's different ways to handle the two colors meeting each other. And so in this way that I'm going to demonstrate, there's going to be a little bit of a gap in between the shapes. And there's ways to, again, create shapes where you don't have that gap or where the meeting looks a little different. There's like, I don't know, there's like dovetail, and I think is like one of the terms that's used for one of the ways to do it. But this is the way that I think is sort of easiest for starting out. The other ways can get a little complicated, not that they're very difficult necessarily, but they can get a little complicated. So this is the method I prefer. So I'm just going in and filling in, grabbing the warp threads to help fill in. And I'll show you what I mean here in a minute by there'll be like little gaps. And again, that's not like one way is not necessarily better than another. It's just about preference. So I'll fill in here. And so this is sort of what I mean when I say it creates these little gaps. So I'll come from underneath. You see here my needle point sort of pokes up. So there's kind of these little gaps, which are no big deal to me. It doesn't affect the structural integrity of it. I don't even, if I were to pull very tightly as I go around these corners with the black, it might create a much bigger gap. But I'm trying not to pull too tight so that it still looks consistent with the lilac. Okay, so as I start to finish up here, so like at this point, I've filled in the black to where the lilac is. So now I have mostly an even row at the top where I could just, if I wanted to, start doing full rows. With the black, I could finish out a full row, or I could start a new color. Again, that's just like part of the fun of figuring it out. Another thing I want to show you a different way to fill in. So I'm going to undo this black. And this other way I'm going to show you, or I guess it's not necessarily a fill-in method as much as it is just sort of a different shape making approach. And I refer to this, I don't know, I'm sure there might be an actual name for it. I don't know, but I call it just organic shape making because it winds up being not so like geometric row by row. It's like a little more fluid. And so basically with this, instead of filling in where the purple left off, I'm just going to make full rows with this black thread and let it lay how it lays. Okay, someone asked, how did I end the purple? So I ended it just the same way I would any yarn. So if I back up and see what I did here, so I had, so I'd finished and I decided like this is basically all I wanted to do with my partial triangle. I didn't want to keep going to a point. I just wanted to end with kind of a flat top. So instead of having my yarn out at the edge there, I just wove it back in a few. So it's not like totally in the middle. I just wove it back in a few warp threads and then just let it be how all my others are. Yeah. So let's see. Let me make sure okay, cool. Just making sure I didn't lose any in the chat. And I think I have. Sorry, I had Facebook open and I hear my message alert. I don't know if y'all are hearing that, but I just closed it out in case you were. So, okay, back on track here. So, but this time, instead of filling in, I'm just going to make full rows over the purple and just see what happens. So sorry, I keep knocking this a little bit. So I already have my black thread situated in the weaving. So now I'm just going to go all the way through. And lay down. And when you do two threads at once, so one sort of tricky thing is making sure you pull them both at like the same rate so that you, like one isn't real tight and the other is real loose. So sometimes you got to play around with that. But so then I lay in, and if I keep building rows like this, I start to get more of like a wavy sort of situation happening. I don't know if wavy is quite the right way to describe it, but you just get these more sort of organic seeming shapes. Like not ones that look like you're making them like on grid paper, I guess. Like the other way that I showed, I think of like using grid paper. And this is a little different than that. So again, so with this method, I'm not necessarily filling in. I'm like keeping this slanted edge as I build my rows. So that's totally okay. You don't have to always have an even, horizontal row as you add new ones. You can sort of play around and have some slanted. So yeah, so then I start to get this fun effect of that black thread coming in and having this cool slanted shape. And then it's like, there's like proceeding from here, there's no right way. Like I could, if I wanted to get back to an even row, I could fill in over here and work until it feels like it's even, or I could just keep sort of going this more organic way and seeing what happens. So yeah, no right or wrong way for how to proceed, but I do want to show you how to make some fringe. So let me finish with this black thread here. Oops, I went the wrong way. Gosh, I'm doing so much of that tonight. I'm very tired, so I'll blame it on that. I've definitely not adjusted to the time change, so feels much later right now than the time shows. But alas, it's that time of year. Okay. Okay, so finished off my block there. And I'll take a sip if anyone has any questions. Okay. So with making fringe, let's see, what color do I want to use? So again, different ways to do it, different approaches. There's also the question I think we talked about last class, like as you're weaving, like, is this the bottom of my tapestry? Or is this the top of my tapestry? So that's something I'm sort of thinking about. Like right now I'm thinking, I don't know. But with fringe, it's sort of good to know when you're making fringe, which is the bottom and which is the top. Because you're doing sort of a knot with the fringe. And it's something where it's sort of like it just looks right in one direction. I hate to say the word right. I don't know what other word to use, but it just it won't quite have the same effect if you do the fringe one way and then you decide, oh wait, like I want the bottom to be the top now. Then like the fringe will look a little different. Maybe it works, but it won't be like the quote unquote right way. Whatever that's worth to say to categorize it as such. So anyway, for fringe, you want a bundle of some small pieces of yarn. So what I like to do is I often will cut a piece of cardboard box, or like just grab something random. So I have this notebook on my desk, and like depending on the size of it, it'll give you different lengths of yarn, which will then give you different lengths of fringe. And so let's see. So this notebook has this sort of cardboard back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this cardboard back and wrap the yarn around it several times. Sorry if I'm getting a little out of frame here, but hopefully you get the gist of it. So yeah, so I don't know how much I'll need. I might need more, but that's good for now. And then I cut one end of this. So it's easy with a cardboard box because you can sort of like indent the cardboard box, but I'm basically taking my scissors and cutting an end of this. And so that's sort of like a quick way to get a bundle of yarn that's all cut the same length. Certainly you could like measure pieces out, like compare them to the others and, you know, cut each one off individually. But that's sort of a quick and dirty way of doing it, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of fringe. That little method is helpful. So I think for simplicity's sake, I'll show the making the fringe sort of right way, directionally right way. And so I'm going to say that this is the bottom of my weaving. Right side up, I guess. You can sort of make your knots upside down. Like if this was going to be the top, I could still have my fringe here, but I'd just sort of be making the knots upside down. And I can show you what I mean by that in a minute. So I'm just going to pull, I don't know, let's say, I'm going to do 4. I'm just deciding to choose 4 pieces of yarn for each of my bundles of fringe. So for this, to make your fringe, you always work with a pair. Oops, I'm not really in frame here. Let me pull this down. So you're working with a pair of your warp threads with your fringe, typically. So what I like to do for this is I put my bundle of yarn behind both of the warp threads that I'm working on. And then you can take your needle or just your fingers. I'll use my needle because I think it'll maybe be easier to see. And you sort of lift up. So you get a little loop there. And then you take all of your ends and sorry, it's a little hard to see. I'll try some different angles in a minute. But you pull up the loop and hold on, let me try it with less pieces of thread. And I feel like this is difficult to see what I'm doing. So let me try and, okay, maybe this is a little better angle. So again, so here's my 2 warp threads. And I'm going to take the yarn behind both of those warp threads. So the 2 on the edge here. And I sort of even them out so they're sort of equal there. And then I pull up on the fringe to get a little arc, a little loop. And then I'm going to take the tassels up, so the ends of my tassels up, and then slip them underneath through that little loop. Oops, one got left behind. And then sort of hold as I pull down and tighten up. So then I tighten up. So then it creates this little knot, this kind of nubby knot, and then I have this fringe. And know that you can always trim your fringe after you're finished. So if it's like super uneven or you don't like the length, you can always trim it. So it's always good when you're cutting tassels for fringe. First of all, if your yarn tassels are too short, it can be difficult to execute the knot. And, you can always cut them if you want them to be shorter. So it's always good to err on the side of caution and just make them kind of longer than you think you'll want. And then I'll choose the next pair of warp threads for the next little tassel. So again, I'm going underneath the pair of warp threads that comes next. I'm going to pick up the fringe bundle in the middle. And I'm going to take the tassels, the ends, and go up with them and bring them through and down towards what I'm envisioning to be the bottom of my tapestry. And you will have to do a little maneuvering to you might have to do some stuff to tidy up your knot there. This one's a little sloppy. It's having to do this around my tripod here. But that's how you would do the knots so that they're facing in the direction, so that they're right side up, I guess. And so let me demonstrate. Well, first of all, before I demonstrate doing them upside down, does anyone want me to repeat this method again? Or does anyone have any questions about these knots that I just showed? The raya knots or the fringe?
I have a question. I thought, so don't you typically do fringe at the end of your weaving? Like when you've decided you're done and which side is up or down, when you put the fringe on last?
It just depends. It depends on what you want. So I've made a lot of weavings where there is fringe at the bottom, but I've also made a lot of weavings where it's in the middle or towards the top.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely just a design element. So, yeah. So if it's something you want at the bottom, then obviously if you're working, if we're using mine as an example, I would have, done my fringe earlier. And if you're going to start, this is a great question. I'm really glad you asked this because I wouldn't recommend starting your weaving. Like I wouldn't recommend the first rows being fringe. Like I always weave a few rows of plain weave before I put fringe down. Like if I know I want fringe as the bottom, like I'll weave plain weave and then put fringe on top of that. And usually the fringe, depending on how much yarn you use or what kind you use, it often will cover up the row beneath. Mine aren't really, just because I'm using little bundles to make it easier for y'all to see. But I'm going to show you now though, if you are like, shoot, I wish I would have, I wish I would have put fringe on earlier. I'll show you. So I'm going to show you how to put fringe on if I were imagining this to be the top of my weaving, because it's basically the same thing. Instead of taking the ends up and down, you take them down and up. And then as you're working, the fringe is sort of flipped up towards the top. And then when you're finished, you'll flip it down and you'll see the nice knot. But before getting into the weeds about that, that's a great question. Do you have any follow-up questions about that, or does anyone need clarification? Okay, so let me show you. We're starting to run low on time here. Hour goes by quick. So let's see. So, okay, if this was my top, same idea. But this time I'm making my knots, my fringe upside down. So underneath my 2 warp threads, still pulling up. This time, I'm taking them, I'm coming down with my ends and then up and through. And so I'm still getting this knot, but as I weave, I don't, this fringe will just be in my way as I try and weave more rows. So I pull it up like this to get it out of my way. So again, like this is what it would look, fringe would look like if you did these knots like upside down, not on purpose. So you would still have, I don't know if you can see that. So it would still be fringe, just you wouldn't have the knots, which would be totally fine. And it wouldn't lay as flat. It kind of sticks forward slightly when it's like this. But if I'm imagining that this is the bottom, then I'm going to be flipping this fringe down once I finish. So it's sort of just intermittently like this while I'm continuing to weave. And I've done it both ways. And there's lots of weavers that do it both ways. I often change if I weave top to bottom or bottom down, like it changes a lot for me. So don't feel like you have to do one way, or just because you tried it one way the first time doesn't mean you can't try it the other way. Like there's no, like you're not wrong if you're weaving top to bottom and making your fringe knots upside down. Like that's definitely not wrong. You just are doing it differently. And then, so there would be my 3 knots. And then same thing, like if you want fringe at the bottom and you're weaving the bottom last, you wouldn't want to just have fringe be your last row, because it wouldn't be, your knots wouldn't be very stable or secure. So you'd want to come back in with some rows of plain weave. So I'm going to come in here, and you don't have to take your fringe all the way across. You don't have to have a solid row of fringe. Like I think I might just leave these 3 little fringes and not worry about taking them all the way across. And so we just have 6 minutes left. So I threw a lot of things at you pretty quickly. So I want to just give a little time. What questions do you have before we part for the week? Or what other things would be helpful to know as you work towards finishing your tapestry for next time?
I have a question. I'm curious, if you had continued that lilac triangle up to the very and ended it, at your left hand piece, like how would you have ended that?
Good question. So I find that with triangles, they can sometimes be a little tricky to end just because the point never feels like fully pointy. Not, especially on the edge, can be a little tricky, but basically I would like just wrap around, and that would like create sort of a point. And let's see, if it were on the edge, let's just see. I'm just going to pull this up and sort of imagine that we were finishing this purple triangle. So it'll be a little trickier since my point is on the edge like this, because that means like I would probably end it in a way where my tail would be then on the edge, since I wouldn't want to weave back in any, because then that would disrupt the design of the triangle. And so that might mean that I need to, it might end up being where I would need to secure that more fully at a finishing stage, like at the finishing step, because it might be a thing. I'm just trying to think. I'm going to try it here and see what I think, because I think probably what would happen is like, I would wrap it around that last warp thread, and the tail would probably, it might like come undone a little bit as I keep weaving. And so I would probably need to like secure that down more fully at the end. So it might be something that like is dealt with fully later on. But okay, let's say, okay, so let's say I'm going around just these two now. So I passed around those two, and then, yeah, I think what I would do, so in this case, it's convenient in the way I have it here, because coming out, the purple is going over that edge warp thread, so I can just wrap around it, and just sort of take, so it just sort of wraps around, but then, yeah, that end isn't really secure like that. So I would tuck that in at the end, and I'll leave that there so I can demo that. But yeah, you basically, on the last one, you sort of wrap it around the last warp thread in a way so that it sort of creates a point. And you would do that too. So you can also, I could create a triangle straight in the middle here too. And the same thing, as I built up, I would just sort of wrap around. Sorry, you can't see. If, I could build a triangle in the middle like this, and could wrap around that last warp thread to sort of create that point. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Great question. Thank you for asking that. What else? Oh, and here's as I finish this, and it would be like this. So then the fringe are right-sided. Just had to make them upside down. Great. Well, 1 minute. Any final questions that y'all have, or does anybody want to show what they've worked on to the group?
I just wanted to ask one final question about the fringe. Is it too late if you decide like where the gray was, where you started, if that's your bottom, is it too late now to add fringe at the bottom?
Not necessarily. It definitely can be done. So what I would recommend for that is like, and it might like take some maneuvering. So if I like really wanted to add some fringe in here, I'd probably try and like push up on these rows a little bit, so it'll just, let me re-spotlight myself. So I'd probably like try and push up on these rows a little bit to create some space. And then you might have to like use your needle a little bit more to help you get in and out. And it'll disrupt those top rows, but you can go back in and sort of refine them and tidy them up. But yeah, you could come in and add it after the fact. It might be a little more, so like with this kind of weaving, we're using pretty thick yarn. It would probably be harder if it was very fine yarn that we were using. In the tapestry itself, like the rows were packed together very tightly. It might be a little harder to do that, but these generally we're weaving more loosely. The threads are bigger. So I think it wouldn't be, I just did one right there. So it wouldn't be too terribly difficult, I don't think, to go in there. It might just like, it's a matter of like getting your fingers sort of in a small space. But I don't feel like that disrupted my stuff too much. So I would just have to kind of like press back down and even it out. But that would be my suggestion for adding it back in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I know it's past time. I'm happy to stick around and answer any more questions if folks still have some lingering ones. But just a reminder, next week, I'll show you how to take your tapestry off. So I think it would be good to be at a place with your weaving where you feel like it's finished. If you need to weave a little bit before, before we get started, like if you need to weave a little bit during class time, or if you have questions or get stuck, like, don't feel like you've, messed up the assignment or anything if you come to class and you're not totally ready to take off. That's okay. But I know for me as a student, it can be nice to like practice the things, as a group and with folks to get questions answered on the spot if you run into any issues. So I would recommend trying that, but don't stress if that's not the case. I'm happy to answer questions after next week's class. And I know Sarah Kate had sent out some photos and some instructions that I had written years ago, and it's not on the same loom, but the techniques will translate to a good extent. So yeah. But yeah, thank you all again for being here tonight. I'm really excited to see y'all next week and see what you've come up with, and I'll stick on for a few more minutes for anyone that has any extra questions. But otherwise, thank you all. See you next week.